I got a mule and her name is Sal.
Hi, good people. Welcome back to A Fork in Time. This is Chris Capola, and I'm joined today by a couple of esteemed colleagues. Would you guys like to introduce yourself, starting with Evan?
Hey everyone, how's it going? It's your boy Evan.
And also Dylan Holzmer, who
Hello,
has
everyone.
he's been on a while. I've been on him to try and come up with a catchphrase. I don't know. So today we're recording this after the holiday break, after kind of the episode where we talked about our podcast that we liked. And I think this is a good like synthesis of both of them, because from two different perspectives, two of the podcasts came up. We're talking today about a different scenario for a trans-isthmian canal. Isthmian,
Yeah,
huh?
Isthmian. Good word.
Isthmian. Yes, Isthmian. For those of you that do not have our A Fork in Time word a day calendar for 2026, um, it's
Or for people who are needing a award-winning word in Scrabble.
right. Basically a canal across the neck of Latin America, Central America, connecting the two oceans. And that is kind of the basic setup, but this is a really long one. I promise there's a canal at the end of it. It's going to take us a little bit to get there. Evan, do you want to go ahead and start us off?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for just basically pulling the pin out of a live grenade and tossing it my way and giving me 4 seconds out of the 7 second window to throw it somewhere else.
You're welcome.
What can I say except you're welcome, right? But yeah, today we are going to be talking about our listening audience is probably very familiar with what is known as the modern technological marvel that is the Panama Canal. And we instead are going to be talking about what was a proposal that was, I would say, honestly, even dating before the Panama Canal really kind of became more of a thing. And that was a potential Nicaragua canal. Now, for our studious listeners, this is where Chris would ask you to do this. This is where I'm going to ask you to do this as well. Pull up a Google Map session and just take a look at the relative positions of Nicaragua and Panama. Now, for the geographically challenged Americans among us, it might be challenging for you to find anything beyond the Bojangles down the street. That was a reference to, of course, something that we said in the pre-podcast, which we might get into later. But be that as it may, Nicaragua, south of Mexico, and Panama, of course, a country that is the last country in what is known as North America, bordering, Colombia, which is in South America. And you'll see when you look at the country of Nicaragua, you'll see a fairly sizable lake with a couple of fairly sizable islands in there. And at first blush, at first glance, it may not seem like this would be a possible strong route for a canal. It seems, and you would be correct in saying that any sort of proposed route through Nicaragua would be substantially longer than what we ended up doing in Panama with the Panama Canal. But an advantage that Nicaragua has that Panama really did not have, and the French, who were the original overseers of a Panamanian project, quickly found out, Nicaragua is blessed with some geographic advantages, and that Panama and that area of the country does not have. Where the Panama Canal is located is in some of the most inhospitable, harsh climate and geography known to man in terms of like rainforest, jungle kinds of areas. More Frenchmen died on the project, I think, as a result of things like yellow fever and the good old-fashioned cholera, which is what you would always die of in your any run of Oregon Trail. Things like that. The French really kind of paved the way for the eventual American successes there, but it took a lot of money, a lot of time. I think it was like what, $100 million,
109.
$109 million in the initial investment. And yeah, so that didn't necessarily go super well for the French, but where the French paved the way, the Americans were able to eventually succeed. In Nicaragua, on the other hand, like I mentioned, there are some geographic advantages. It is much closer to sea level. So rather than having what we see in the canal now in Panama, where you have like kind of a step ladder sort of levee situation, and you have to wait for the water to fill or to be released, dams, those sorts of things. There would be a little bit more of a natural route in Nicaragua from the ocean, not to mention a lot more navigable waterways from, the eastern shores of the big lake down over to the Atlantic side. So we're talking from west to east in terms of geographic terminology. But the reason why Chris has drafted me with this live grenade that has now certainly exploded in my face many times at this point due to my over explanation of geography is because where this story is going to begin is with one of my personal favorite subjects of a podcast that I have had the pleasure of listening to. And that is of one American filibusterer by the name of William Walker. And when you think of the term filibuster, don't think of the term that you might have heard of it on C-SPAN, like Rand Paul speaking against, the National Defense Authorization Act for however many hours, or Cory Booker speaking against certain Trump appointees or nominees or whatever, like senatorial filibustering. We're talking much more so along the lines of mediocre white guys deciding that the best thing to do with their lives and the best way to spend their time is to try and take over Mexican and Central American territories. That enterprise quickly became known as filibustering. So our William Walker has led a very storied life, and for purposes of brevity with this probably already going to be quite a long podcast episode, I'm not going to get into all of the ups and downs of his very fascinating life, but suffice it to say, he's a very eccentric individual. He's a very interesting individual. And Chris, I'm sure you're already gonna do this, but I'll ask you to link the episode of about William Walker on Behind the Bastards. That's one of the podcasts that we have recommended and talked about before on the show. Yeah, that episode I think will really catch you up to speed on who William Walker is. But prior to some of his adventurism in Nicaragua, William Walker tried to take over a couple of states in Mexico, like basically by himself and with a small army of Spartans. I mean, really basically just people who couldn't make it in various California gold rushes or adventures at that point in time. He became the head of the Independent Republic of Sonora, and by that it was literally just him and his small army conquering a couple of poorly defended towns, and even the people in those poorly defended towns hated their guts and chased him out. So he had to redeclare his capital, move it back. Again, not going to get into the weeds there, but very interesting story until the Mexican army showed up and kicked him out too.
And by the way, before you say this sounds completely implausible and a little crazy, keep in mind that this is like 1840s, 1850s when this is going on, when he's doing these things. And I want you to go ahead and read a book on how Texas became a thing.
Yep.
Because it sure sounds a lot like this.
Yeah.
Pretty much. And also keep in mind that this is the era of manifest destiny. So essentially, we're America. We deserve to have from sea to shining sea, coast to coast, because we're white and we're Merkins. That's essentially what it boils down to. So imagine having that as your mentality and as your
But
mindset.
by the way, I do feel like not to mess with it, but I do feel the need to specify North Americans.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, that is a very important point to consider because we are also in the midst of the brewing conflicts that will eventually lead to the American Civil War.
Oh, I just mean not North in terms of North versus South American Civil War. We're North Americans because actually these are Latin Americans.
Yeah.
They're Americans too.
Yeah. Right.
Everybody here is Americans.
Very true. That's a very good point. Yeah, no, Manifest Destiny is only for Americans in the United States of America. Um, that's what the Manifest Destiny doctrine was all about. So essentially, to make a long story short, Walker gets thrown out of Mexico and he is driven back to California. He decides, you know what, maybe that wasn't such a great idea. Let's try to go for a completely different country instead. Let's go to Nicaragua. And the reason why he does this is because in his initial Mexican forays, he was hoping that the people there would see him as like kind of a liberator, somebody who would be able to help lead them into some new golden age. He had very paternalistic attitudes, very racist attitudes, towards these people. Obviously, a great thing to have for a set of individuals that you hope to rule over. But of course, they did not welcome him with as open of arms as he was hoping. So he decided rather than start a conflict just fresh out the gate, why don't I take advantage of an ongoing conflict? Why don't I pick a dog in a fight in an unrelated country, and maybe they will see me as the messianic figure that I was hoping to be seen as in Mexico. And to a certain degree, it actually worked out for him that time. So he became the leader of a mercenary army that was employed by one of the sides in the Nicaraguan Civil War. You have the Nicaraguan Democrats, the Nicaraguan Democratic Party, and they had a civil war against the conservative legitimist political party. And, not really getting too far into the weeds of what the main conflict was between the Democrats and the legitimists, because if it didn't matter to Walker, it doesn't really matter to me at this point, because what ended up happening was his mercenary army was able to take control of the Nicaraguan government. And in July 1856, so only like a year after he started establishing operations in Nicaragua in 1855, and only, 3 years or, 2 to 3 years after he was thrown out of Mexico, he became the president of Nicaragua in July 1856. Famous president Franklin Pierce, who he took over the reins, and I say famous very tongue-in-cheek, is one of the least known and widely seen by historians as least effectual presidents in U.S. history. He's one of the string of presidents.
I do feel like he might be the only U.S. president that has a sitcom character named after him.
Okay.
Hawkeye, Benjamin Franklin Pierce.
There you go. A little bit of historical trivia there. But like he's one of the presidents like between Polk and Buchanan that most people just don't really know about in the lead up to the Civil War.
Really, he's one of the presidents between like Andrew Jackson and Teddy Roosevelt that isn't Abraham Lincoln.
Right, exactly. Because, Chris said it from like a broader perspective from like most Americans. I'm talking about it from a nerdy fork in time perspective where we know all these guys' names. The one thing I know Franklin Pierce for is his campaign slogan was pretty brilliant. I think it was something like, "We polked you in 1848, we shall pierce you in 1852." pretty good. Like, honestly, I think that's a pretty good pun play on terms for his campaign. But Franklin Pierce was like, yeah, you know what? I'm going to recognize this guy. Why not? He took over. Might makes right. Walker finally was able to get the coveted support and backing of the United States, which he critically lacked in his initial Mexican endeavors. So, in our timeline, Walker had a pretty short tenure as the president of Nicaragua. He was only in less than a full year, July 1856 to May 1857. Probably not a great idea to come into the office, re-legalize slavery. So slavery was abolished. He came in and said, nope, we're reopening the doors. We're going to have a society of, there's might makes right, and then there's white makes right. So the white people are going to be the ruling class, indigenous black laborers, slavery, awesome, great. Didn't actually succeed. He never implemented it, even though he legalized it. And he also decided to be a great idea to antagonize Wall Street tycoons like Vanderbilt, because the whole reason the Nicaragua Canal is happening in this alternate timeline is Nicaragua has a very important geopolitical location. Walker decided to thumb his nose at Vanderbilt. Yeah, that didn't really end up going super well for him. And he also ends up pissing off the Brits as well, the British Empire, during his rule. So in our timeline, Walker gets tossed out of office. He is forced to resign when a military coalition from neighboring Costa Rica ends up just storming the Bastille. Although in this case, it's not the Bastille. I forget what Walker's home is actually called. Man, that's kind of a funny story. But I won't get into it now. Again, there's too many weeds I can get into with William Walker here that I'm trying to keep myself from. So in our timeline, he gets thrown out of office, and that'll have downstream effects, no pun intended, on the possibility of a Nicaraguan canal. But Dylan, you had an interesting idea, and Chris as well, I'll give credit where credit is due, on something that can help change history and keep our esteemed colleague, which I say in very tongue-in-cheek terms, President Walker in the saddle.
Yeah, so the idea is, and this is actually kind of before Walker formally becomes president, but it's while he's in the thick of the filibustering Civil War. And the idea is in the kind of tail end of the sort of the Nicaraguan Democrat supported by filibusters versus the legitimists, Walker doesn't do one very, very dumb thing. And that is after the legitimists basically surrender, they're led by General Ponciano Corral. They surrender. Walker kind of puts together this sort of coalition / everybody who's left to pick up the pieces government. And there's a figurehead president, President Rivas, but Walker is the commander-in-chief of the Nicaraguan army. So he's the one who has all of the real military power and is basically the man behind the throne. But Ponciano Corral is appointed the Minister of War. So he is very much still in the picture as a former general who led, a civil war against the victorious, the winning Nicaraguan government. Walker kills it like a month and a half after they get this coalition government together. That then is really basically the moment where everybody says, okay, this went from a civil war to a bunch of filibustering Americans basically appointing, deposing, killing presidents at will. And that is what triggers Costa Rica the following February in 1856 to actually declare war on Nicaragua. And that is kind of the beginning of the end that leads to Walker being ousted. So our fork is, what if Walker doesn't kill Ponciano Corral, thus creating a more stable kind of coalition survivorship, pick up the pieces government in Nicaragua.
And we promise this has something to do with the Nicaragua Canal.
It does. And we will get back to that discussion, ladies and gentlemen, after a quick break from our sponsors.
Hey everybody, this is Hank Hill coming at you with a special message from our sponsors.
Hola, Nicaragua, the beaver has landed. Get ready, Managua. The world's most legendary pit stop is officially crossing borders. Buc-ee's is bringing its award-winning snacks, world-famous restrooms, and massive smiles to the heart of Nicaragua. Located right on the Carretera a Messiah. Peggy, what have you got me reading over here? We aren't just a gas station, we're a destination. Whether you're heading to the beach or just navigating the midday traffic, the Beaver is here to make your journey better. What's waiting for you? The cleanest restrooms in the world. Yes, the rumors are true. We take our throne room seriously. If Bill Dotrieve can use these throne rooms, so can you. Texas barbecue meets Nika flavor. Grab our iconic brisket sandwiches or try our exclusive Buc-ee's Gallo Pinto breakfast burrito. My own son Bobby swears by them. I think he might even be cooking them himself. Endless fuel, 80 plus fueling positions so you can get back on the road in record time. I'll even throw in some extra propane if you make it there the first weekend. The merch. Grab your limited edition Buc-ee's Nicaragua t-shirt and hats. Join the fiesta. Located on the Carretera a Messiah, Managua. Expect a massive celebration with music, prizes, and a chance to take a selfie with Buc-ee the Beaver himself. Why settle for a quick stop when you can have an experience? Everything is bigger in Texas, but our welcome is even bigger in Managua. We can't wait to see you there. Buc-ee's, it's a Beaver state of mind. All right, ladies and gentlemen, now that we're back, so we're basically looking at a sort of at least semi-stable Nicaragua in 1856, 1857. And, you know, we have a Nicaraguan president, but really Walker is the one who's behind the scenes. And I think at some point, it's probably not super unfeasible that Walker becomes the actual president of Nicaragua to help kind of sync things up in our timeline. But let's say he at least lets Rivas serve out a full term as, you know, kind of president. Maybe Corral has a less than convenient stagecoach ride somewhere, train ride somewhere. Basically, Corral can still get out of the picture, but Walker just doesn't blatantly out and out execute him. He just kind of has an accident somewhere, and there's not enough proof that anybody can really show that Walker was involved or there was any mishap. So he essentially becomes a president of this new Nicaraguan government. And I know Chris had some really interesting ideas as to what impact that has on, you know, the looming in America, because remember, Walker is very much a Southerner in terms of American politics, what that does on the Civil War and more importantly, kind of after the Civil War.
I mean, the fact that, and thank you, Evan, for bringing this up. Whenever you like reinstitute slavery, you're gonna have a bad time. The fact that like when he, you know, he's not in power for a full year, and yet that was at the top of his agenda, that tells you where William Walker's gonna come down on the American Civil War and
make Nicaragua great again. Step one, reinstitute slavery in a very pluralistic society.
And so, you know, he's clearly on. We know what side he's on. I'm going to throw it open to everyone else. I think, like, for those of us that are fans of Red Dawn, we understand what a threat Nicaragua can and has been to the United States. However, I don't really think they're in much of a position to necessarily affect much, or even, you know, I think Walker like sees the situation and says, I'm happy where I am. I don't necessarily see the need to intervene because I can create like what I want where I am. And if I start messing around, that very quickly might change. So I think we're in agreement that, you know, he emotionally supports the South. He likes them, but he doesn't necessarily cross any red lines into an actual intervention.
I mean, he's stupid, but he's not
that
dumb.
stupid.
Like,
by the way, for those of you that like don't necessarily want to go to anything yet. The Behind the Bastards episode that Evan mentioned is literally titled "The Dumbest Colonizer in History."
Yeah. Like he is stupid, and clearly by the fact that he thought he could win a land war in Asia. No, clearly because he thought he could win and establish and carve out an entire new country, Republic of Sonora, and thought that the Mexicans would do absolutely nothing about it. I mean, yeah, okay, we are talking about the country that we did just beat in the Mexican-American War. So I can maybe give him a little bit of credence there. But I think just coming in and thinking that after we had just taken a bunch of land from Mexico, they're going to be totally fine and okay with a mercenary army of 300 coming in and sweeping through some backwater areas of Mexico, no matter how backwater they might be. Yeah, that's just not going to fly. But despite his stupidity, I think general stupidity, I think Walker is, especially now as the president of Latin American, Central American nation, he's not going to want to do two things. He's not going to want to do anything to upset the United States, because honestly, I would probably say his ultimate end goal would be a Texification. I imagine he would want the United States to either take over or to administer the territory in some form or fashion. So he's not going to want to do anything to upset them. He's also not going to want to do anything to upset another country in the region that has significant interests and would breathe down his neck at the soonest possibility if they could. And those are the aforementioned British. They have, some interests. They have a protectorate in what is now known today as the Mosquito Coast. And Nicaragua actually didn't formally own their part of the Mosquito Coast at this point. It was still part of the British protectorate. So Walker, I think, is going to be much more focused on promoting, creating, and instituting his own version of manifest destiny and slavery and everything along those lines. As the president of Nicaragua, I think he's going to be mostly internally focused and just making sure that he manages factions. Probably a good historical corollary to this is, and his name's at the tip of my tongue, but as soon as I say it, you guys are gonna jump in on this. Remember the Alamo guy, the Mexican general,
Santa Anna.
Yeah, Santa Anna. Thank you. The closest corollary I can see is he's going to be, he's the president. He's going to be somewhat this kind of Nicaraguan Santa Anna, trying not to have his shirt taken from him.
Well, he's going to be a little bit more successful. Santa Anna went through
he'll be more
multiple periods.
Yeah, he has the sense to actually stay in power and not overreach instead of backstab everybody 4 or 5 times. But I think that's kind of the sort of position he's going to be in. And especially once you get to after the Civil War, that presents an interesting option for what happens, especially with this whole manifest destiny thing that Walker's very much about.
So, Evan, go ahead and use the chance to plug, but my pronunciation is horrible. I can't tell the difference between a Spanish confederato and a Portuguese confederato. Go ahead and talk about that for a second.
Yeah, well, I'm just going to say you're going to ask the wrong guy, because while I am very familiar with, the Mexican/Spanish way of saying something, there is actually a decent number of Brazilians and Portuguese speakers in San Diego, but we are much more widely known for our Latin culture, Mexican culture in that way. So I can't probably answer that question, but I shameless plug for my own podcast, Evan Extemporaneous. I did do a sidebar discussion in my latest episode about the Confederados, which are a group of former American Confederates, mainly landowners, mainly former slave owners, who after the South lost the Civil War, the Brazilian government and the Brazilian emperor at that point made a lot of these people an offer they couldn't refuse. He basically said, hey, look, you can get cheap land, you can bring your slaves, You can basically just redo everything that you did in the antebellum South, but in Brazil. So basically, just antebellum South, but with extra steps. We'll welcome you. We'll roll the red carpet out for you. You can do what you want. And a lot of these American Southerners took the offer and never looked back. And it's kind of like a lot of, we said this in the pre-podcast too. It's like a lot of, mysteriously German surnamed individuals who showed up in Argentina after certain events in the 1940s. Kind of a similar vibe. South America just kind of seems to be the pressure valve for racist white people to escape to when things hit the fan. But anyway, I digress. I'm just dropping a lot of bombs here today, but don't mind me.
Don't worry. I'm waiting. I'm waiting. For everybody, those of you that are actually trying. We're recording this early January, so what I'm about to talk about has already happened. I want to see who makes a Venezuela reference.
Oh my gosh. We try not to date the shows here too much, but I think
that's you. That's a you thing. I love throwing things in like that.
Honestly, hey.
Because it makes it sound better if it changes in the future. We could be like, oh, back then. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Remember then? Yeah, exactly. Love it. But anyway, getting back on track. So the Confederados, you're like, no, we are not getting back on track. That is not what the show's about. So the Confederados, former Confederates, they end up settling in Brazil. They found a city that is still there to this day. I think it's called Americana, which is it's a pretty interesting name for a city. And there's still a significant presence there. They actually still host these giant festivals with full battle regalia, Confederate battle regalia, the Confederate flag, all of that. So especially like in like the early 2010s timeframe, when like South Carolina removed the Confederate flag from government buildings and government grounds, Mississippi got rid of, the last state to get rid of any sort of Confederate symbolism from its state flag. We actually have like a city and areas in Brazil where, Confederate heritage and symbolism is still like openly celebrated. So that's another set of interesting discussions for another time. But the reason we're bringing it up during this show is because maybe something similar could happen as the result of Walker's endeavors. He could basically take a look at the situation, either pre-Civil War or post-Civil War, and who knows how long Walker himself may be around. But the nominally friendly to America and friendly to Southern interests Nicaraguan government, which would be lasting longer in the alternate timeline, could take a look and say, hey, why don't you guys come down here? We have, quite a bit of land. Slavery's legal. You don't have to worry about any of that.
And I think if you look at the Brazilian Confederados, the majority of them were probably upper crust landowner types who, frankly, could pick up and move.
Yeah.
Who were so tied to the idea of, being so lazy that they owned other people to do their work for them.
Well, and they were incentivized. And they were incentivized by Dom Pedro because he wanted to get cotton planting off the ground. So he actually subsidized some of the transport of these people.
Right. And he personally greeted many of these people, like from the boats. He's just like, he was there and shook their hands. He wanted these guys and their labor pronto.
But this was, in terms of like a demographic shift.
Yeah. It's only like 20,000 people.
Right.
Yeah.
And Dylan, this is why we do pre-podcast, because sometimes I get off on a branch and Dylan tries to bring me back. One of the things we were talking about was, definitely like Walker in Nicaragua is going to welcome in these people. I think, the idea, we keep talking about it, but I think it's true. He wants to Texasize Nicaragua. He wants to import Anglo settlers, and
with if you have a pro-Southern Nicaraguan government, especially if we're talking about a Nicaraguan government that's going to implement the sort of Confederato kind of immigration welcoming that actually ties into this sort of Confederate sort of mythology of the sort of Confederate version of Manifest Destiny, the golden circle over all of Latin America.
Mhm.
So it is, one, it's going to be it's going to be a more attractive offer because Nicaragua, because it's kind of in the isthmus, it's got more trade, it's more established than the Confederados that went to Brazil literally turned down land that would have become an entire neighborhood of Sao Paulo because it was too marshy, and went 35 miles into the Amazon because they were like, that sounds better. So this is guys just like literally wandered into the woods. If they're coming into Nicaragua, one, it's a more hospitable welcome in terms of the government wants them to come. It is also a more hospitable welcome in terms of they can actually have easy places to live and some infrastructure and cities and things like that. And third, I think, and maybe most interestingly, there is especially right after the Civil War, you have what amounts to a supermajority of Congress and the White House controlled, at least for the 6-7 years after the war. And then with Congress, it's even further out. You have what amounts to a supermajority of radical Republicans who favor not being friendly to these people under any circumstances. So I think an interesting, kind of idea that is going to sell the radical Republicans on this idea is this is a very interesting twist or turn of the head of the idea that before the Civil War and even during the Civil War, even Lincoln entertained the idea of emigrating, freed African Americans and freed slaves once the Emancipation Proclamation comes in to places like the Caribbean, to Liberia. So that's I think the Black Republicans of Reconstruction are going to say, we're totally fine with these guys leaving. We're gonna emigrate them just like they wanted to do way back in the day.
I think for an alternate history podcast, we don't talk about turtle dove anywhere near enough.
Yeah.
But one of the things he talks about in like his scenario of after a Second World War is like, we have these two groups of people that have always lived in the American South. They've fought each other. And what's the alternative to them living with each other?
Mm-hmm. Them not living with each other.
And this is one of the realistic ways of like, listen, these are, I think what I described to in the pre-podcast was, listen, do we want to spend the money to buy these people a ticket, or do we want to let them stay in the South and become domestic terrorists?
Yeah. So, and I think that provides, Chris in the pre-podcast was talking about it as being a good pressure valve because this is the alternative to basically, at least until Reconstruction ends with kind of the corrupt bargain of 76, you have this desire of people to not want to have to deal with the reality after the war. So the alternative is, okay, we'll go down to Nicaragua. We have, people that the Southern white U.S. planter class can feel superior over, and they have a friendly government, and they have, for lack of a more sensitive phrase, they have some territory to play with. And I think that then, to bring us back to the Canal, that then this sort of new revised version of Nicaragua presents a really interesting alternative, basically ground for how the whole Isthmian Canal concept comes around.
I think one of the things we talked about, if kind of Walker can survive that critical period of legitimacy and actually and it's not necessarily a 4-year, but if he makes it past the American Civil War and this scenario happens, a lot of things are going to come together in the late 1900s, the late 19th century, late 1800s, and a couple of things to really make a canal possible. One of those is going to be the generation that fought against these people is going to die out. you're going to have a government friendly to the United States, but not necessarily remembering what happened in the Civil War.
Without some of the animosities.
Right. And I want to, we're getting kind of close to what in our timeline was the Spanish-American War. Dylan, you have to tell the story. You have to talk about Wheeler.
So, and I forget his first name, but basically in the Spanish-American War, because this is the first war that the United States has fought, really, other than the Indian Wars, since the Civil War. So this is an opportunity for people from North, from South, sons of former Confederates, some even former Confederates themselves, to get together to find common ground and go, off the shores.
And Wheeler
fight.
Was a Confederate that was recalled into the army. You talk about the Indian War. That was a very small, this was a national effort where we actually brought them back in.
Yeah. So the federal government, when they're marshaling up troops to go fight in Cuba against the Spanish, they actually pull. I don't even think he was a general. I think he was like a lieutenant colonel or something. This guy.
How old he was? You're talking about in the Civil War.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, how old was he that he's still alive 40 years later?
Yeah. But anyway, they find a Confederate veteran named Wheeler, and they give him, I think, a brigadier general rank or something. They give him a brevet rank in the army.
He was, if you go up, he was commanding Teddy Roosevelt. Not directly,
but he was like a commander of the volunteers. But basically, they had him ride out at this procession of all these troops as they're marching off. And Chris, what does he say? He's old enough. Keep in mind in 1898, he's going to be pushing 80. So he's kind of gone out to pasture a little bit. But Chris, what does he say in the march?
Something about we're going to go out and whoop those Yankees.
He literally can't remember what war he's in when he goes off in 1898. That's what some of the last of these guys are going to be like. So they're almost all out of the picture. But their sons, they're going to be removed in Nicaragua. So they're going to be, they're removed from the environment. So they don't have some of the animosity that being surrounded in the vestiges of that last lost cause culture is going to do. But they also, they have their own country and stuff that now is going to be talked about in the discussions of, okay, hey, let's do a canal. And the reason why I say that's going to come up is quick recap of Isthmian economic development over the years. It was when the California gold rush hits in the 1840s, it was actually faster, not cheaper, but faster, rather than travel all the way across the country from, New York or, Illinois to California. It was faster to go down in New Orleans or catch a steamer from New York, go all the way to Panama, where the canal is now, go overland through the Darien Gap, through the mountains, through some of the most inhospitable territory on Earth to the other side of the Pacific, catch a steamer and go up to San Francisco. You would get there faster and hopefully find gold faster than you would to go across country.
Yes. And to our point here with the Nicaraguan canal, there was also a significant route that was owned by Vanderbilt through Nicaragua. And it was basically the same thing. You would, go through, let's say you go from New York, you go to the San Juan River, and then you sail across Lake Nicaragua. You would then go over stagecoach or horses or whatever across a narrow strip of land, and then you are able to reach the Pacific. So that was still better. That was still better than just going across the whole American West.
Yeah, and the debate over the Nicaraguan canal, actually, the Nicaraguan government signed a deal with Vanderbilt to potentially build a canal in the 1850s. And unfortunately, one of the things that kept Vanderbilt from executing was William Walker.
Walker in our timeline.
But this debate, even though it goes all the way back to, especially in terms of where this is going to happen, goes all the way back even to the earliest days of Spanish colonialization. There's a great quote from Philip II of Spain when Balboa and some of his successors in the 1550s, these guys are bringing up the idea of, hey, we need to find a way to get from the Pacific to the Atlantic and vice versa in Panama and Central America, in the Isthmus. And Philip II's response was, if God had wanted a canal there, he would have put it there himself. Because that's how daunting of a task this is. But once you get to
be fair, just to kind of jump us a little bit forward, at that point, the best way, if they wanted to dig a canal, technologically, was to literally
with shovels.
No, was to use Philip II's chin.
I knew it was going to come out sometime. I knew a Habsburg chin reference. But that just shows you what I'm getting at is, so by the 1870s and 80s, there's a realistic debate that's going to be happening that is starting to congeal into the sense of distinct possibility and not just these kind of super hypothetical, almost wish list dream kind of scenarios for a canal in exactly this area.
And that's also kind of I'm sorry, that was just such a great transition.
Unfortunately, there are no Habsburg. Well, actually, there are still some Habsburg chins, but they're in Austria.
Some Habsburg chins. But by this point, we do have other ways of moving Earth.
Yeah.
We've got steam shovels. We've got dynamite that really, just on a technological basis, allow this to happen.
Yes. Yeah.
We almost didn't have the technology to do it.
Yeah. And the reason why Nicaragua comes up so much in these discussions is if you compare Nicaragua to Panama, like Evan was talking about, Nicaragua has several advantages. One, it has rivers, it has a giant lake. So, a good chunk of your canal is already basically built for you. It also has much flatter terrain. It does have mountains that you've got to deal with, but it's not essentially entirely mountain. It's, Panama, you literally have to dig either through jungle that you can barely get through with a machete before it starts growing back, or solid rock. And Panama, I think you have to get 300 or 400 feet of elevation. Mm-hmm. Like when they were first talking about building the Panama Canal, I kid you not, one of the concerns that they had with, do we want to do this, was if we get all the way to the Pacific and we break through, is the Pacific going to waterfall spill into the Atlantic because of the elevation difference? Nicaragua doesn't have that. It's much more flat. Mm-hmm. So Nicaragua presents a much, logistically and kind of, in terms of sheer man work hours, it presents a much more attractive scenario, especially in this timeline for where a canal might naturally be built, especially if you're the Americans trying to build a canal in American-friendly areas.
Yeah, because again, sorry, you can go ahead, Chris.
No, please.
I was just going to say, who has the rights to the Panama Canal? And I forget exactly when this happens, but initially it's the French.
Yeah.
The French, in our timeline, they, as I've mentioned in my little leading monologue, they laid a lot of the foundations for the Americans to eventually take over and finish the job. But they themselves, they had to really struggle with, and they had to abandon the project eventually. And the whole history of how, well, it'll probably come up here, and Chris, maybe you'll talk about this as well, a little bit dipping back into what did in our timeline. But how the Americans kind of took over and eventually went with the Panama proposal is actually a very interesting set of circumstances, and really just kind of shows how maybe just some small things in history really end up making a massive change, a massive difference. But I would say if we do this, the fork that we do in our episode in the alternate timeline, I would say we're probably not even really going to have as much of a debate, I would say. But Chris, I'll let you.
Well, actually, Dylan had a really good couple of comments on the other friend of the pod, of our pod,
friend of the pod. Yeah,
we like them. They're beautiful people. We like them. I don't know.
Oh yeah. And those of you who are listening to our holiday listening guide, Empire podcast does a really good 4-part episode on the development of the Panama Canal. And it's fascinating, especially because when you get into the American debate, it essentially all comes down to an American lobbyist and a French investor trying to recoup all of the money that they had lost in the first expedition And the way that they sold it to the Americans is they literally basically were just trying to get out of the investment before they all went bankrupt again, because they went bankrupt once, sell off the assets for whatever they could make. And it basically all comes down to an American lobbyist sending senators a copy of a stamp of Nicaragua with a volcano on it to scare them into voting not for Nicaragua because, oh, the volcano is going to destroy the canal if we build it there, and instead going with Panama, which just so happens to have all this French work in it. And when I say French, classic
moneyed interests, classic, totally no backhand dealings or everything. I find it funny that the French, who spent over 109 million on this, they basically reduced their asking price to 40 million the instant that they realized that they could actually get the canal through the U.S. Congress if they reduced the asking price to 40 million. Yeah. And I also think the stamp it thing is pretty funny because, first of all, as Dylan noted in the pre-podcast, that volcano is like what, 100 miles?
It's 100 miles. It's on the other side.
Right. It's on the other side
Lake Nicaragua.
Of Lake Nicaragua. And so, there might be some seismic things that happen, but in terms of an actual eruption,
from my understanding, it's theoretically a volcano. Geologically, it might have erupted at some point, but there's no recorded history. I mean, there's no history of it. Actually,
And so, especially once and to keep in mind, the other thing about the French Panamanian excavation, the quality. So this is by the same guy who built the Suez. That's how the whole French Panama Canal thing gets going, because he can't rest on the Suez. He's like, I got to do another one. The French Panama Canal excavation essentially amounted to them digging and then dumping the dirt right next to the canal to the point where the dirt would slide back into the canal. So not necessarily the most engineering.
For all of you that were like 7 years old trying to build a sandcastle on a beach,
literally.
This is
That's literally
it's
the
like
vibes of this
Acme Construction Company from like a Looney Tunes cartoon would probably do a better job at building the canal.
Well, yes, because Acme has TNT.
Yeah,
of course. What else do you need?
So that's.
But the other thing I wanted to know about the volcano too is that they based this fear-mongering campaign on a eruption that happened somewhere else. Yeah, in Martinique, just in a completely different
French
place.
Antilles,
Hundreds of miles away. So, again, it just goes to show how small things and small propaganda campaigns in our timeline really can have such a huge impact on world history, because really, when you look at the actual facts, and of course, the members of Congress at that point could only deal with the propaganda leaflets that were being stuffed into their congressional mailboxes at that point. They didn't have Google, and they didn't have, like any good American, they had a map. They just didn't know how to read it. But they were like, oh, wow, volcano? Yeah, no, we can't do that. Let's just go through the jungle instead, because that's clearly a lot easier.
Yeah. And so what I think the big difference in this timeline gets to is, one, the debate is going to be much less kind of, which we can't decide which one are we going to do. I think it's going to kind of, from the American perspective, the French may still be butting their heads down in the Darien Gap, who knows? But I think for the Americans, Nicaraguan's going to be much more of a natural decision. It's like, logically, okay, we've got friendly business interests down there. Vanderbilt's already got some railroad spurs down there. I almost kind of envision a Nicaraguan canal, at least in the early stages, as almost being kind of like a transcontinental railroad development, as in it's just a natural progression of things that are going to happen. And then only, once it gets close to completion, the government of Nicaragua, kind of around the same time period as the canal in our timeline, Teddy Roosevelt presidency, early 1900s, they reach out and try and negotiate a deal, or the Americans reach out and negotiate a deal with Nicaragua for, kind of a similar version of the canal zone idea from Panama in our timeline, where America controls the access, the maintenance, all that.
Is it like that? Is it a zone within still a nominally sovereign country, or is it more like a Hawaii where it's just take over, just bring us in?
And that's actually why I wanted to go there, because I think at first it's a zone, but I think because of some subsequent developments, it may end up becoming a takeover. Kind of depends, because the one con with Nicaragua as opposed to Panama is Nicaragua is much closer to British interests in the Caribbean, because right up north of it, you've got British Honduras, modern Belize, you've got actual Honduras, you've got a bunch of, kind of British islands that are around there. And this is right on the tail end of the kind of 1800s where the United States and Britain are kind of fighting, kind of arguing, kind of working things out over all these different territorial lines, both in North America, in the Pacific, because Americans are obsessed with finding guano and bat poop everywhere they can out there. The one thing I think about a Nicaraguan-American canal is the British in particular are going to be much more threatened, especially after a Walker American-friendly Nicaragua gets installed. I think the British are going to be much more hesitant about, the Americans may say they care about free trade and all this, but what do they really want? Not necessarily to the point where there's going to be problems, but there may be some friction under there. And I think that gets into what might happen with, if America intervenes, I think then that you definitely provoke a British reaction or perception. If America doesn't intervene, there will at least be some tensions between what the British are concerned about with the Americans having basically what they see as a chokehold for the only way to access. Because this is the reason why the canal is such a big deal. If you don't have a canal, you have to go either north of Canada, which they haven't discovered yet, so that's not an option, or you have to go all the way around Tierra del Fuego through the Drake Passage, which is one of the most inhospitable sea routes you can possibly go through.
Well, or do you think this is kind of a situation of the United States saying, you know what, Great Britain, you partnered, or you own Suez, you worked with the French on that one. Yeah. We're okay if you try and build a Panama Canal.
That's what I was thinking.
We're going to build the Nicaraguan.
Yeah, I think that's actually a very likely possibility. I think in this world where or in our timeline where there was more of a staunch established opposition as it played out, as it panned out, Teddy Roosevelt wanted Panama, Congress wanted Nicaragua, but then they were able to switch it to Panama. I think this is a situation where both the U.S. and the British would be, and the French, who they still have what's going on in Panama, they're like, hey, you know what? We can have two different canals. I think this is a world that is much more likely as a possibility to happen. And I also think that the Americans, to kind of help prevent more squabbling with the British, they would be more than happy to keep Nicaragua nominally independent, because as the saying always goes, why buy the cow if you can get the milk for free? Why take it over if you can still just kind of keep sending Walker types, if you can just kind of keep pushing it around, if you can have George Bush and the CIA do whatever they want down there.
So the problem, and I think you're right. I think it just depends on what the native political situation is in Nicaragua, because if you want to look at it a certain way, in 1909, the United States technically did send a certain Walker type down there, but he was actually an American military veteran, and he was in charge of the U.S. Marines, and it was Smedley Butler. So I think it boils down to, is Nicaragua stable, or do they get into kind of another sort of Civil War type thing, like in our timeline, where, in our timeline, 1909, they had to protect American interests in Bluefields. Here, if there's a similar situation, I think the Americans are going to go more full bore, because it's not just business interests in Bluefields, it's an entire canal.
Yeah. But so we think the British basically convinced the United States to leave a nominally independent Nicaragua.
Yeah. I would say so, yeah.
Then we kind of have, it actually gets built. The United States is actually able to construct it. I don't think the other, once the United States has the opportunity to actually build the canal and show these concerned parties, hey, listen, we're going to allow you to actually transit this canal, especially with what's coming up, what actually starts the same week that the Panama Canal is actually finished in our timeline.
Yeah.
When that happens, I think the British look at this, or the British and French look at this and say, you know what, we're actually okay.
Yeah.
Depending
All things
on the
considered, we'll
American
take
canal.
this deal.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we'll take this deal. We have seen we can use this American canal. We don't need to go through the effort of building our own.
Yeah.
And by the way, what
that's
I
another
alluded
possibility
to,
too.
what I alluded to, by the way, in our timeline, like when the United States actually started constructing the Panama Canal, it was finally finished the week that Germany declared war on France.
Yeah.
In World War
In
I.
1914.
In the Great
Yep.
War, World War One. Exactly. So I think, as we kind of maybe start bringing things to a close here, there's just a couple of things that I am thinking about. I'll say three things. One of them is kind of short. That is, I'm very interested in knowing what the knock-on effects of this are going to be on other Central American nations, because like a huge part of Costa Rica's national identity, for example, comes from, in our timeline, of all places, the ousting of William Walker. So an interesting facet of history is that we Americans don't remember all the places that we messed around and found out in, whether with William Walker types or just, whoever. Like, we don't remember those because we have the collective memory of a goldfish. Many, especially of our listeners who may be from that region, they can probably attest to the fact that the William Walker types are very remembered in Latin America, and not for good reasons. And so that kind of, is a big reason why there's a lot of distrust, the speak softly and carry a big stick foreign policy philosophy of Teddy Roosevelt might have played over well in Peoria in America, but, still leads to kind of a good amount of healthy distrust of the Yankees or the Americans, even up until this day. Case in point, the national hero of Costa Rica was a drummer, Juan Santamaria, and he lit a filibuster stronghold on fire. He sacrificed his life to do so. He's the national hero of Costa Rica. So just, that's just one example. I'm sure there's other examples that we can bring up. So what I'm kind of getting at is this is the first kind of main question that we can think about, toss around, consider, and maybe get into in our officially threatened part 2 of this endeavor. But first main question is, how does this change the dynamics of and like the broader history of other Latin American countries in the region? The second question, I'm going to kind of spit all of these out because we can either develop them a little bit here at the end of the show, or we can just save them for next time. The second question I want to throw out is, what ends up happening to Panama? Because for the point in time of this particular area of history, at this point in history, Panama's not independent. They're actually still owned by and part of Colombia. And I would argue that the whole Panama Canal issue was a very instrumental part in the United States, supporting Panamanian independence. And that's a whole very interesting and very undercovered facet of history that the Panamanians remember, we don't. And then I guess the third main point or issue that I would want to think about is not just economically how things would change, but also environmentally. Because a fact that we have neglected to mention for the duration of this show is that Lake Nicaragua is no Dead Sea. Lake Nicaragua is, in fact, the largest freshwater lake in the region. If you cut into it on both sides, if you Bugs Bunny Florida away from the rest of the United States, if you Bugs Bunny your way through Nicaragua, well, Lake Nicaragua is no longer the largest freshwater lake in the region. It is now going to become a saltwater lake. And I think that has very fascinating and potentially devastating ecological consequences that we probably don't often get to on this podcast, but I think that would be very interesting to trace those potential impacts as well. Like I'm sure in terms of the economy, like the commercial shipping routes and everything that would be opened by making this lake a saltwater lake would be immense. But maybe some of the environmental impacts would be something that would be the unintended consequences. That's just something that I think would be very interesting to trace as well. So I'm going to throw it to my other co-hosts. Now I'm going to take back I'm going to take a grenade from my own personal stock, pull out the pin, and throw it back to Chris and Dylan if they want to tackle 1, 2, or all of those at once here at the very end.
We do kind of have a plan for a part 2. I think the political situation, both in terms of a Panamanian settlement and in terms of what this does to the rest of Latin America, I think we should save for that. The one question I have about the ecological effect is this. I believe this is still going to have to be some sort of a lock canal.
Yeah, it's just not quite as severe.
So if we have that, I mean, it's relatively easy to maintain some form of division, and I don't necessarily see that necessitating turning Lake Nicaragua into a saltwater body.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's an interesting question. I mean, I think certainly it can be one of the things that I think we can certainly get into once we've had the canal for a while, and we, especially in the next episode when we talk about, okay, what does Nicaragua look like? Once we get out of World War II, once the canal's been built for a decade or two. It's an interesting question. I do think the ideas are meaty enough that we probably, I don't want to get into them now. I kind of want to save them for part 2, but I think they're a good stepping off point for us to keep our discussion going, because those of you who know Nicaraguan history know, even in our timeline, this is not the end of fascinating things that Nicaragua and America have to do with each other. And I think some of that is what we're going to adventure through the impacts of when we go through this little fork again on the next episode.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I think I was happy to be able to throw those in at the very end here, because that does provide a good foundation for discussion leading into a possible part 2. Gentlemen, any other remaining thoughts or issues to bring up before we tie the bow on this and make it a neat package?
No, I think that's it.
All right. Well, everyone, thank you so much for following along with us here on this Nicaraguan Canal episode, this possibility. I'm trying to weave in, I think there's a song I heard one time, about 15 years on the Erie Canal or something like that. I'm trying to throw that in here somewhere, but it's not really working on
We'll give you points for trying.
Well, you'll give me some participation grade. There you go. But yeah, 15 years on the Nicaragua Canal. I don't know. But anyway, thank you all so much for tuning in. And if you enjoyed this episode, be sure to leave a comment, leave a rating for the show. Those are great ways to get the algorithm to like us more and say, hey guys, check out this nerdy, interesting show that you may or may not have interest in. Feel free to check out our Discord. That's the primary way that we like to communicate and stay in touch with our fan base. If you have any more long form comments or suggestions for topics even, we are always listening. So thank you all so much, and we will catch you on the next episode. And before we finish, we always like to end off with our favorite little closer. If we happen to stumble across a fork in the canal of time, what, pray tell, do you think we should do with that?
Make a stamp out of it.
Make a stamp out of it? I was hoping one of you two would go on an extended rant about install a William Walker-led counterinsurgency government and end up taking it, but I said it, so now it's out there. But yes, if we happen to stumble across a fork in time, I think we should take it. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thanks for listening to A Fork in Time, the alternate history podcast. Learn more and provide feedback by visiting our website at www.aforkintimepodcast.com. Connect to us on Facebook at facebook.com/aforkintime or follow us on Twitter at AFIT Podcast. If you want to support the show financially, visit our Patreon page at patreon.com/aforkintime. We hope you will join us next time.